The Reformation. 1. Definition. This refers to that period in European history when the Catholic Church split up in the 16th century, the 1500s. It was followed by the Counter-Reformation, which refers to the efforts made by the Catholic Church to halt the break-up. 2. The need for reform. The abuses within the Catholic Church at the time caused criticism. These abuses included corruption. Many of those at the head of the Church, even some popes, led lives that contradicted their rules. Some were sexually active and had mistresses and children, while many others lived lives of great luxury more suited to kings and princes. Lack of education. Many of the ordinary priests in parishes and monks in monasteries were unable to read or write and therefore were incapable of doing the reading necessary to do their jobs. Nepotism. Popes, cardinals and bishops often made sure that their relatives, and sometimes their children, received important church positions that were above their abilities or qualifications. Simony. This was the practice of buying and selling church positions. Sometimes popes, cardinals and bishops either paid bribes to get their positions or received bribes to give positions to others. Pluralism. This was where a person would have more than one position within the church so that they would have more power or more wealth. For example, a bishop might have 2 or 3 dioceses. Absenteeism. If some office holders held more than one position and did so to gain power and wealth, it was inevitable that sometimes the person didn't do the job at all because they were not in attendance. The sale of indulgences. One of the beliefs of Catholics is that there are such things as indulgences. An indulgence is where if a holy place is visited, like a pilgrimage, or if some good deed is done, or prayers are said, some of the time to be spent in purgatory is reduced. Purgatory is a place where the souls of those who die must go to be cleansed of sin before they can enter heaven. As the Church was in the process of collecting money for the building of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, donations to the Church for that purpose were said to earn indulgences. The sale of indulgences became a point of disagreement between some Catholics and the Church, especially Martin Luther, as we shall see shortly. 3. Other reasons for the Reformation. The main reasons for the Reformation were the issues mentioned previously, but there were other reasons, including the spirit of inquiry fostered during the Renaissance promoted the idea that everything could be questioned and some things could even be criticised. The growth of countries under the control of kings meant that the influence of Rome over local issues, and the fact that some of the church's tithes would go to Rome, began to be resented and looked on as interference. If the church became a local church, not under the control of Rome, and without money going to Rome, so much the better. The widespread use of the printing press meant that new ideas could be spread quickly. 4. Martin Luther. Born in Eisleben in 1483 in Saxony, then part of the Holy Roman Empire, Martin Luther became an Augustinian priest and lectured in theology in Wittenberg University. He objected strongly to the local bishop when a monk named Tetzel arrived in the town selling indulgences. However, his protests got nowhere, as that bishop was benefiting from the practice, as he had bought that position. Simony. Luther nailed his 95 theses, or his 95 arguments, to the door of the chapel in the castle of Wittenberg. These theses explained why he objected to the sale of indulgences, and included such points as why doesn't the Vatican itself pay for the building of St. Peter's, as it has such wealth, and why, if the Pope can reduce the time to be spent in purgatory, does he not do so anyway, to be charitable rather than looking for money to do so? Apart from this dispute about indulgences, Luther had 2 other points of major disagreement with the Church. He challenged the authority of the Pope and bishops, as he believed that the Bible and not church teaching was the only source of reliable information on how a person could be saved and get to heaven. Related to this was his second issue, that the Bible and church services should be in the language of the people, in the vernacular, and not in Latin, that could be read by very few. That way, people would be able to work out for themselves how to get to heaven. In 1520, the Pope demanded that Luther withdraw his teachings or be excommunicated. In 1521, at the meeting of Parliament, the Diet, in the town of Worms, it's all called the Diet of Worms, he was again asked to withdraw his teaching. When he explained that he could not do so, he was excommunicated by the Pope, and the Holy Roman Emperor Charles, the same Charles who financed Magellan's exploration in 1519 to 1521, asked that he be arrested. Luckily for Luther, the local ruler, Frederick the Wise of Saxony, gave him sanctuary at his castle at Wartburg, where Luther translated the New Testament from the Bible into German. Many princes in Germany had now taken on Luther's beliefs, and they protested to the Emperor Charles, claiming that they should be able to decide their religious beliefs. Because of this protest, they became known as Protestants or Protestants. Luther died in 1546, aged 62, just before the 9-Year War started, and was survived by his wife, Katharina von Bora, and their 6 children. He had many religious followers, and today much of Northern Europe, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, and Germany, is Lutheran. 5. War in Germany. The Protestant and Catholic princes in Germany now started to wage war on one another, and that war lasted for 9 years. The war was won by the Catholic side, but Lutheranism was now too well embedded in the country to be defeated, and the Peace of Augsburg allowed each prince to decide which religion would be practiced in their state. 6. Other religious reformers. Other religions followed from Lutheranism, the most important being Calvinism. John Calvin was a French Catholic, but converted to Protestantism when he studied Luther's beliefs. As France was strongly Catholic, he was forced to leave, and he went to Switzerland, where he was invited by reformers in Geneva to make that town a model of his beliefs. Like Luther, he believed that through studying the Bible, people could know what God wanted of them. That it and church services should be in the vernacular. That baptism and the Eucharist were the only sacraments. And that churches should be places where people prayed without the distraction of statues and excessive decoration, and that priests could marry. Unlike Luther, who believed that the local king or prince was the head of the church, Calvin thought it better if the church was led by lay ministers, known as the elders. Calvinism believed that, as God was all-powerful, he already knew which people would be saved. This belief is known as predestination. Others viewed Calvinism as a very strict religion, as it insisted on plain clothes, it outlawed drunkenness and gambling, and any singing or dancing that was deemed inappropriate was punishable. Geneva was known as the City of God because it was run along the religious beliefs of Calvin. In Europe, Switzerland and Holland became mainly Calvinist. John Knox brought that religion to Scotland, having been impressed when he visited Calvin in Geneva. In Scotland, it became known as Presbyterianism. The followers of Calvin in France were known as Huguenots, but that religion was persecuted there. 7. The Council of Trent. The leaders of the Catholic Church, the cardinals and bishops, met in Trentino in northern Italy many times between 1545 and 1563. The result was the restating of Catholic beliefs that there were 7 sacraments, not just 2 like the Protestants believed, that the Bible was an important source of belief, but that church teaching should also be followed. The Pope was head of the church, and that priests shouldn't marry. The main church service, the Mass, should continue to be said in Latin. Abuses such as simony, pluralism, nepotism, and the sale of indulgences were banned. Churches should continue to display images of Christ, Mary and the saints, as these were useful ways to get the faithful to think of heaven and to understand their faith. Priests needed to be trained better, so special schools called seminaries were to be set up in dioceses to look after their education and training. New religious orders, such as the Jesuits and the Ursulines, were set up to ensure that, by educating the children of the wealthy, the leaders of society would be good Catholics. A list was drawn up of books that were not to be read by ordinary Catholics, and then these books were banned. The Catechism was produced and showed what Catholics were required to believe in, and Catholics were required to learn that catechism. 8. The Reformation and Ireland. At this time, the Tudors were involved in trying to take more of Ireland under English rule. Henry VIII split from the Catholic Church because he was refused an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, who had not produced a male heir. Henry had no desire to bring Protestantism to England, but rather to be seen as head of the Catholic Church in England. In fact, he became known as the Tudor Pope. It was his children, Edward and Elizabeth, who changed England to its own brand of Protestantism, called Anglicanism, or the Church of England. Mary, his eldest child and daughter of Catherine of Aragon, ruled for a short period between the other two children, and attempted to reverse the trend and bring the country back to Catholicism. But she died after only 5 years in power, and Elizabeth reversed her decisions. Although there were attempts, especially under Elizabeth, to make Ireland a Protestant country, Ireland stayed firmly Catholic, despite the so-called penal laws. Settlers who came to Ulster during the plantation of Ulster in the beginning of the 1600s from Scotland were Scots Presbyterians, and that part of Ireland continues, to this day, to have a strong Protestant tradition. Those that came for the plantation of Derry were Anglicans. Lastly, 9. The effect of the Reformation. The power of Rome, as the head of the Church in Europe, declined as all of Europe was no longer Roman Catholic. The Catholic Church itself reformed during the Counter-Reformation, and some of the worst abuses were outlawed. Europe experienced many wars fought because of religion. For example, the 30-Year War from 1618 to 1648 that ended in the Peace of Westphalia. The Holy Roman Empire didn't really survive the Reformation, and it was replaced by many separate countries. And religious intolerance became a feature of European life.